All right, Alexander, let's talk about what's happening in the UK with Brexit and with Boris Johnson. We've got a lot to get into. So, what's the latest with what's going on at Brexit, or some of the bad news that might be happening with Brexit? But get into it.
Well, I mean, the important thing to understand is that the Johnson government looks like it's unraveling, and this has happened very suddenly and very fast. Now, this is important for Brexit because, in terms of the guarantee that we would get a Brexit, which would probably be a no deal Brexit by the end of this year, um, Johnson and the team around him provided that guarantee. If Johnson is weakened, or worse still, from a Brexit point of view, if Johnson goes, then that whole subject is thrown open. And with Remainers still very strong in the Conservative Party, and perhaps arguably getting stronger with the Labour Party still strongly committed to remain, and with the civil service also strongly committed to remain, as is much of the British business community, we will start to shift back towards a deal which, though it will not take Britain back into the EU's political structures, will probably try to reintegrate Britain in the EU's economic structures, which, if you remember, was what Theresa May was trying to do. What Theresa May was trying to do was to take Britain out of the EU's political structures, but keep Britain in some form within the EU's single market, and therefore subject to decisions of the European Court of Justice. And as we pointed out in program after program that we did last year, that would actually in some ways be a worse position for Britain than staying in, because it would mean that Britain would continue to be subject to a whole swathe of EU laws, but would have no actual role in forming them. So it would not, in effect, be a Brexit at all, certainly not in economic terms. It would be a Brexit not in name only, as some people have talked about. It will be a worse position than a Brexit in name only, because it would mean Britain becoming, in effect, an economic dependency or satellite of the EU, but with no actual role in its decisions, a little like, in some ways, Ukraine currently is. So that's a rather alarming prospect, I would have thought, but that's what was threatened in 2019 under Theresa May, and it's become suddenly a possibility now. How has this come about? Well, firstly, I think it must be said that the response to the pandemic has weakened Boris Johnson. I mean, he is not a manager. He's never been a strong manager. And this has really stressed him. He became very ill, if you remember. He became infected. Many people have said that he's never been the same man since he recovered, that he's lost a lot of his bounce, his force of personality, his self-confidence, and much of that. The effect has been that he has struggled to form a coherent policy in dealing with a pandemic. So back in the first half of this year, when the pandemic struck, he was initially very, very reluctant to go for a lockdown and was criticized for waiting too long before he imposed a lockdown. This autumn, when we've seen sort of case count crank up again, he's announced a lockdown, and in the process has antagonized a large number of Conservative MPs and business leaders who oppose lockdowns. And the reason they oppose lockdowns is because they see them as very bad for the economy, very bad for society, and antithetical to what the Conservatives stand for. So he's lost support there. And at the same time, he is not the vigorous and buoyant figure that he looked to be at the start of this year. And the result has been that he's become exposed to an extraordinary power struggle that has happened within his own office. Now, when I talk about his office, I mean his personal staff in 10 Downing Street. Now, the person who was heading that office was a man called Dominic Cummings. You may remember we did a program about him some months ago when he was involved in a scandal because during the lockdown, he drove all the way to Durham, and many people felt that he breached the lockdown, and he came in for a great deal of criticism. Now, Cummings was, during the 2016 Brexit referendum, the campaign manager of Vote Leave, which was the major pro-Brexit team. Distinct, by the way, from Nigel Farage's. In fact, Cummings and Nigel Farage don't get on very well. And that's an important point to understand, because one of the features of Cummings's personality is that though he is an extremely effective campaign manager and is a very, very strong Brexiteer, he is also a very abrasive figure who is very unpopular with many people. And he is even unpopular with many of the strongest Brexiteers within the Conservative Parliamentary Party. It also turns out that he is on very bad terms with Boris Johnson's fiancée, who is a person called Carrie Symonds. Now, what happened was that Cummings tried to appoint one of his friends, one of his colleagues, one of his team, a man called Lee Kane, to a senior position within Downing Street to be directly Boris Johnson's chief of staff, to tighten up the Downing Street operation and, in effect, to put him in an even more central position in control of the Downing Street operation. Important, bear in mind, as I said, that we have a deadline coming up in a very few weeks for Britain to leave the EU's economic structures without a deal if there is no deal. So this is an important time, and arguably an important time to tighten up. What then happened was that a coalition of Conservative MPs, Conservative ministers, and Carrie Symonds, as I said, Boris Johnson's fiancée, opposed this appointment of Lee Kane. They managed to persuade Lee Kane to resign from this position. This created then a briefing war. That's to say, Cummings and his people spoke out in the media against specifically Carrie Symonds. Carrie Symonds and her supporters spoke out against Dominic Cummings. And now Cummings himself has resigned. And he's taking, it seems, a significant part of the original pro-Brexit team, which is in Downing Street with him. And already you could see that there are now maneuvers of people who want to take Cummings's job. One of them is a man called Syed Jaffed, who is a Conservative MP. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer until the beginning of this year. He's supposedly pro-Brexit, but he's well known to be friends with many Remainers and with Carrie Symonds, who's Johnson's fiancée. There's also talk that Michael Gove, not Michael Howard, Michael Gove, who is the Cabinet Office Minister, who is a rival of Johnson, also supposedly a Brexiter, but more moderate on Brexit than Johnson and certainly Cummings are. He's manoeuvring apparently and talks about him himself becoming Prime Minister within 6 months. And others are talking also. And it seems that there were reports just a few days ago, just about a day ago, that Johnson himself, who is exhausted and demoralized, was telling his friends that he doesn't expect to remain Prime Minister for very long and could be out within a year. Now, when a Prime Minister talks like that, his authority disintegrates. And if his authority disintegrates in that way, he will probably be out much faster than a year. So we will start to see what happens, but it looks as if the Johnson government is unraveling, and unraveling at a crucial time.
So who becomes prime minister if Johnson leaves?
This is a $1 million question. There are two people, I think, to look at. One is obviously Michael Gove, who, as I said, has made it very clear that he wants to be prime minister and is apparently manoeuvring already and has said that he expects to be prime minister within 6 months. He's a very tough-minded, sharp-elbowed individual, committed to Brexit, but, is the kind of person who supports Brexit, but who would do a deal with the EU and who would probably agree a postponement. So we would not have, a no deal at the end of this year. We would have negotiations going on over the course of 2021. The other person who a lot of people are talking about is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that's to say Britain's finance minister, who is a man called Rishi Sunak. Now, the thing to understand about Rishi Sunak is that at the beginning of this year, he was seen very much as a Johnson Cummings man. He was supposed to be a loyalist, but he has increasingly maneuvered himself to distance himself both from Johnson and Cummings, and is widely seen by many people to be a much more moderate figure, and certainly someone who would be even more likely to go for a Brexit deal and to postpone the negotiations than Michael Gove is. So those are the two most likely personalities. It's most unlikely that either of them would take the strong line that Johnson and Cummings have done. So it's a revolution in politics in Britain, and it's all happened in a most surprising and unusual way as a result of intrigues within Downing Street, of which, by the way, we don't have the full details, even as we're speaking.
Right. So Boris Johnson is demoralized, and thus he wants to resign because he screwed up CV because he had a bunch of scientists once again dictate policy, and he all these leaders are screwing up CV with their ridiculous second, third, fourth lockdowns that they're all pushing because they're not making policy. They're letting scientists make policy, and the scientists are being influenced by powers that be, and everyone has their suspicions and their ideas as to what those powers of be are. Boris Johnson the other day met with Bill Gates and top pharmaceutical CEOs, and they were talking about health security and all kinds of nonsense like that. Who voted Bill Gates to create policy for the UK? I don't know, but I mean, this whole thing sounds very childish because of. I mean, you're the Prime Minister of the UK. What do you care? Number one, what your fiance says.
Yeah,
but I don't understand that. I still don't understand why Cummings left. I mean, that also sounds kind of like, kids in a playground being upset with each other, and Boris Johnson's girlfriend doesn't like him, so I'm going to leave. That also sounds absolutely childish.
Yeah.
And you bungled the CV. Okay, you bungled the CV. Maybe, how many times do I need to say maybe? This constant policy of lockdown mask, lockdown mask, lockdown mask. Maybe you can get a little more creative and think of different solutions outside of lockdown masks. This whole thing sounds very, very suspicious and very childish to me as an outsider looking in. But I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the point here.
No, you are absolutely right. I said we don't really understand exactly what's happened because, as I said, the story that we've had makes it. I mean, it sounds like, if I can say so, a story out of a Tudor court. One of these sort of medieval dramas. You have, the aging king, Boris Johnson, caught in a power struggle between, his minister, his sinister minister, and his fiance. It could be, Cardinal Richelieu versus, Anne of Austria, or Anne Boleyn versus Thomas Cromwell. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense. in terms of modern politics. And I don't really think that politics in Britain actually works like that. And irrespective of what exactly has happened, it speaks very badly of Johnson. I mean, he's always known to be somebody who's never been on top of, the detail. But I mean, I never imagined that, he lacked management skills to this extent. It seems extraordinary. And exactly why Cummings has left himself, again, as you rightly said, it does have the quality of a tantrum about it. It all seems extremely strange. So we don't yet know the whole story. We don't really know what's been going on. We don't know why this sudden collapse of support has come from. Because can I just say, until a few weeks ago, until about a week ago, the general public, and that includes me, knew nothing about this. This has blown up out of nowhere. And I have never heard of the Prime Minister's fiancé or indeed spouse exercising this kind of power in Britain before. I mean, this is absolutely unheard of. I mean, prime ministers have obviously been married and have had relationships, but we've never had a situation where, the spouse or the partner exercises this kind of power. It's bizarre. So something clearly has happened. Something has snapped, and I can't help but think that what this is Boris Johnson being told by someone or by a group of people that his support, for whatever reason, is draining away. I mean, that is the impression that I have. But even if that's wrong, that is now the impression that is being reinforced, because it's the message that's been given out of all of this is that Johnson cannot run his own office within Downing Street, cannot control his own policies, can't establish his own policies, can't hold on to his own people, and isn't able to defend them and protect them or be loyal to them. So it's suddenly, as I said, confidence has crashed, but it does have consequences. It does have implications. You're seeing all over the media here, which, to be very clear, apart from the Daily Telegraph, is solid in being pro-Remain and wanting a deal. There is suddenly this big cry that we must actually extend the time for the negotiations and do a deal sometime within the next few months or weeks. And this is now, these voices have suddenly been given an enormous amount of power.
Is this some sort of media psyop like what they were doing in the United States as well against Trump? But it sounds to me like, number one, this may be some media psyop in order to get that extension, that postponement of Brexit, which eventually means, for God's sakes, when was the Brexit vote? 2016?
Oh, no.
I mean, Jesus, my God, you're going 4 or 5 years now. Just get the hell out of the EU, for God's sakes. Because if you do another postponement, that's it. I mean, the whole thing is unraveling, and I think that's the point. So is this a media psyop? Because you mentioned this guy, and I've read about this guy, Sunak. I mean, I don't know his policies that well. I don't know him that well, but he was being mentioned, I think 2-3 months ago, kind of prepped to be the next prime minister. All of a sudden, all this hits Boris, his fiance, Cummings. Boris cannot go on any longer. The election in the United States, the voting irregularities, and this Biden victory, and all of a sudden the neoliberal, neocon, globalist agenda picking up speed. Bill Gates is landing in the UK to talk about health security in the CV, and more lockdowns. Boris consulting with the scientists and all these people, these consultants, lock down everything. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, Liverpool completely locked. It seems to me that they've successfully pushed Boris over the cliff. They've prepped this guy, Sunak, or possible replacements. And this is all being led towards a Brexit postponement, which eventually will mean, to the scenario that you said, an even worse situation for the UK than actually being inside the EU, which means you're totally subservient to your economics, to the European Union, but you have zero political power whatsoever. This is like And all of this is happening right after they've pulled the shenanigans that they've pulled in the United States, which is nothing less than a color revolution and a regime change operation against Donald Trump, weaken Donald Trump, and now it looks like they're gearing up to weaken the UK. I don't know. All of this is very, very odd.
Yes, well, can I say, first of all, I mean, I think that's essentially right, but there's a few points I would make. Firstly, the difference between Donald Trump and Boris Johnson is that Boris Johnson has, to some extent, been complicit in his own downfall. I mean, he could have come along and said, I am not firing Johnson. I'm not firing Cummings. I stand fully behind Cummings. I am going to have Lee Cain as my chief of staff. I am the prime minister. I decide who my chief of staff should be.
That's where the fiancé comes in, though. Never underestimate the power of the fiancé. I mean, I don't know. Well, I know. It's very suspicious.
Contrast that with Trump, who, in spite of immense pressure, is conceding nothing. What I'm going to say is this, and I've not said this before in our programs, but I'm going to say it now. Boris Johnson comes with an awful lot of personal baggage. And I can remember when he became foreign minister, many years ago, back in 2016, there were widespread reports that he wanted to improve relations with Russia. It was one of the things he wanted to do. And then he had a meeting with the heads of the intelligence services. And he then did a 180-degree U-turn and suddenly said, I'm going to be actually very hard on Russia, and became extremely hard on Russia. And I've always wondered what actually happened over the course of that meeting, because there's never been a real explanation. But as I said, Boris has an interesting past. I'm not going to say more than that. He's not even clear, apparently, how many children he has. So who knows? There may be, if you like, compromat. This is just speculation. I simply don't know. So there's first of all, there's that to consider. There's that to consider. But the other thing is talking about Rishi Sunak. Now, there's some very interesting things to say about Rishi Sunak. Firstly, you're absolutely right. I mean, a year ago, this time last year, I hadn't even heard of him. I mean, he was already an important minister. I mean, he was chief secretary to the Treasury. I mean, he was clearly a rising man, but I mean, he's risen from nowhere at sort of, warp speed. It's quite remarkable to see how fast.
Reminds me of Obama in a way. Out of nowhere comes this guy. Out of nowhere.
Absolutely, this is well. I mean, absolutely. Now, the other thing to say about Rishi Sunak is, of course, the one thing we do know about him is that, other than good looking, which is another thing he has similar to Obama in some ways, he's also immensely rich. He went to Winchester, which is one of the very privileged schools, and I think he is the son-in-law. I mean, he's very rich already. His family is extremely rich, but his son-in-law is a multi-billion. His father-in-law is a multi-billionaire, one of the wealthiest people in India, and obviously a member of the global elite. So he has that connection. Against that, and I think this is an important thing to say, he has also been, apparently, within the cabinet, the biggest opponent of lockdown. Now, that may simply be a tactical step in order to win over anti-lockdown sentiment, in order to position himself more strongly as, the putative successor if Johnson goes. But the extent to which Sunak has come from nowhere and in the space of a few months has become suddenly this person everybody is talking about as this great chancellor, this great finance minister, this wonderful, effective leader, is really extraordinary. I mean, in politics, usually in Britain, it takes decades, or at least many, many years, before someone rises to the point of prime minister. I mean, Margaret Thatcher became an MP in 1959 and became prime minister in 1979. It took her 20 years to build herself up to that point. Sunak, I mean, the rise is astonishingly fast, unbelievably fast. Reminds me a little, in British terms, of someone else, Tony Blair. Tony Blair had been very little heard of until, sort of mid-1990s. And then suddenly he becomes this extraordinarily, big figure. And then he becomes leader of the Labour Party. And then he becomes prime minister. I mean, he'd been around longer than Sunak has been. But again, it was really astonishing how fast Blair suddenly rose. And Sunak, it's exactly the same. And again, there are similarities. I mean, I could never see it myself, but Blair was, a personable-looking person, and this is apparently a major part of his appeal. It's the same with Sunak, and they're youngish, they're rich, and they're connected with all sorts of very, very rich people, and they suddenly rise.
Yeah, it's incredible how CV has been weaponized politically. It really is astonishing. It was weaponized politically to great effect in the United States.
Yes.
Now it looks like it's been weaponized incredibly effectively in the UK as well. The scientists and these consultants, I believe, are all, I don't know, this is once again, this is my opinion, everybody. I believe all these consultants, most, not all, most of the consultants across every country are completely compromised and have been weaponized as well. I think they've been weaponized to great effect as well. And I think that in politics, nothing is a coincidence. And I think what we've seen played out in the United States and what we're seeing all of a sudden play out in the UK, which seems to me at tremendous speed. This is happening so quickly.
I know.
I just can't help it that none of this is a coincidence whatsoever. And this Sunak guy, I agree with you. He reminds me, for me, you say Blair, for me, it's exactly like Obama. It looks like the UK is about to get Obama'd. I don't know. It seems like they're going to get Obama'd. I can't, it's happening so fast that it really does take me aback. And my final point on all of this, and you can close out the video, Alexander, is if they postpone Brexit, I think it's lost. If they postpone Brexit again, that's my opinion. I mean, we're going to go on what, 5 years, 6 years now?
Well, I agree. Now, can I just say something? This is one of the interesting things, because you remember a short time ago, Nigel Farage reconstituted his party and said that it was the anti-lockdown party. But I wonder whether, in fact, this isn't preparations. This wasn't really a preparation to reactivate the party, because he was getting hints that there was something going on within the government, which we weren't aware of at the time, that there was, in fact, that these intrigues of some sort were underway, and that, he feels that he needs to reform his party fast. Because I'm going to say something, and there's already been some articles to this effect in various parts of the newspapers. A Blairized, Obamaized, pro-EU Conservative Party is intensely vulnerable in its working class strongholds in the north of England and in the Midlands. And that vote that was given to them in December 2019 was very, very much a vote about getting Brexit done. If Brexit is seen not to be done, then, as I said, those votes will go. And given that the Labour Party is still very, very pro-Remain, I strongly suspect that this is where Nigel Farage is now preparing the ground to make big inroads in those working class constituencies again. So, it's going to be very complicated, because you're perfectly right. If a deal is done and it's given the force of international law, difficult to break out of, might not be possible to revisit, but we could see very real political turbulence, with many people in Britain very unhappy, well, that's an understatement, with what has happened. and with the Conservative Party seeing its position slip in those parts of England which it won in 2019 and which should have given it its majority, bearing in mind that, as in the United States, the big cities, London and the big cities, seem to be lost to the Conservatives. Well, they've never been very strong in them, but I mean, those places are going to vote Labour almost regardless of what happens. So, it's going to be a very unstable and difficult political situation in the future, and we'll see how it all turns out. But the other thing is to say is I don't believe this has happened over just a few weeks, and I don't believe it was merely the appointment of a chief of staff, this man Lee Kane, that has precipitated this crisis. I strongly suspect that the attempt to appoint Lee Kane was an attempt to stabilize a situation which was already starting to unravel. So I wonder what has been going on behind the scenes, which we simply don't know about. British politics can be very secretive and can be, intrigues can happen in ways that we don't really understand. We're hearing stories about WhatsApp groups being, formed over the course of the summer, and all kinds of wire pulling going on, and we just don't really understand it all. One day we will find out, but we will see how it happens. But certainly there's been a political revolution here. I mean, I think coup is not too strong a word, because this is in effect a coup. I mean, removing the Vote Leave people from the Downing Street operation when they were absolutely central, fundamental to the government, is an extraordinary change. It's left Johnson himself, as I said, looking incredibly weak and exposed and holding on by a thread. And at the same time, it's happened at an absolutely critical time. And as you correctly said, and to quote Lenin, because he said it, everything is connected. Nothing happens by chance.
What's the timeline, real quick, with what's going on with Brexit? I don't even.
No,
I'm a little fuzzy as to. I mean, is there a date where they're supposed to?
Yeah, I mean,
deal with this stuff, or what?
It has to be done this year. That we have to.
2020.
In 2020, but that's the law. It can be changed. Now,
by who?
By the Prime Minister, by the Cabinet, by Parliament. But bear in mind, there is an overwhelming majority in Parliament to do it if it's ever proposed. So if the Prime Minister, if Boris Johnson comes along, if it is Boris Johnson, if it's, if it's say Michael Gove or Rishi Sunak, more like plausibly, they come along and say, well, I've just become Prime Minister. I need time to negotiate a deal. I'm the new Prime Minister. All sorts of things have to be sorted out immediately. So if they come and ask for an extension of, say, 6 months, a year, they will get it. They won't get a deal within the time needed, but they might go for an extension. If there is an extension, there will be a deal. If there is a deal, it will not be the deal. It will not be a no-deal Brexit by definition. And it will see Britain making important concessions, perhaps on fisheries, more plausibly on industrial policy. And industrial policy is actually the key, because that means going back again under the supervision of the European Court of Justice. And when you start that in one area, you start to get it in other areas too. Carry on.
Can Boris Johnson just last for 2 more months and just get the F out of the EU, and then get the F out of Downing Street if that's the situation? If he wants to leave, can't he just last for 2 more months?
Yes.
Activate the Brexit WTO terms, I guess it would be.
Yes. And in fairness, that seems to be what he's trying to do. He's apparently been calling the pro-Brexit MPs and has been telling them that he will be there, that he's not that he's not himself compromising, and he's trying to reassure them that this thing is still on course. So we'll see, but doesn't alter the fact that in ahead of a crucial deadline, he has suddenly and dramatically been weakened. And of course, these reports that he's been going around telling people that, he expects to be out within a year may not be true. I mean, they may be stories that are just being spread by someone, but the impression is of a very seriously weakened prime minister. And obviously, if someone has compromise on him, well, that might be wielded also. So, we're going to have a nail-biting couple of weeks now before the end of the year and before we know exactly what's happened.
How come Boris Johnson, final question, because this whole thing is absolutely crazy. How come Boris Johnson just doesn't come out with a press conference and say, look, there's all these rumors are false. This is just media speculation and fake news. I'm here to stay, and whoever left my cabinet left my cabinet. Whoever is in my cabinet is in my cabinet, and we're going through with what we promised the people of Britain.
Alex, it's precisely the fact that he's not doing that that is giving even more force to these rumors. You would have thought that a prime minister who was, sensed that the situation was sliding underneath him would come out fighting. I mean, that's what Donald Trump would do. I mean, God help us, even Lukashenko in Belarus was able to do it. I mean, you remember he went out, when there were all those protests, and went to the factory and, spoke in front of the workers, and some jeered him, but, he pulled it round. Johnson isn't doing that. He's hiding in Downing Street. He's allowing people to speak for him, but he's not speaking out himself, other than apparently telephoning MPs. Which again, is because MPs are a shifting group. They're never completely reliable. Well, I mean, some are, but there will be others who will be saying to themselves, if Johnson is going, then we've got to prepare for a Sunak government, because if Sunak becomes prime minister, we need to be on the good side of him, because he'll give us jobs. If we stand out against him, then we're exiled to the back benches. There'll be lots of people making those kind of calculations now. So a strong prime minister, a Margaret Thatcher, I mean, I can remember Margaret Thatcher again. A Margaret Thatcher would be at this point coming out fighting, would be speaking out, would be going on television, would be meeting people, would be giving broadcasts, would be appearing at the, outside 10 Downing Street, would be doing those sorts of things, rallying support, showing to people that she's in charge, giving the impression that she's in control. Gordon Brown, who was the last Labour Prime Minister, who was the subject of endless plots by the Blairites, which he survived, even though he eventually lost badly the election. But one of the reasons he was able to survive those plots was, again, because he did that. He would come out, he would speak to people, he would show that he was there, he would meet the MPs, not just talk to them, and he would rally support within the parliamentary party. Johnson isn't doing that at the moment, and the fact that he is not doing that is allowing the rumours and the speculations to grow. I'm going to give you my guess. I think that he understands that Brexit and getting Brexit done is an important part of his legacy. And I think he will try to hold on for the remaining 2 months. And at the end of it all, we will see it all through. Because without it, I mean, people would ask, well, what was the point of all that then? I mean, they will. And I think he understands that is his political legacy. So I think he will try to cling on, but be under no doubt he is, as of this moment, a seriously weakened prime minister, and he is hanging on by a thread. And there are all these forces in the background, some of which we don't really know or understand very well, being mobilized and are working against him.
Yeah, I mean, never underestimate the EU and the globalists and the media and all these forces. I mean, maybe Boris is, that's what worries me. Maybe Boris is saying, I just have to hang on for 2 more months, just 2 more months to deliver Brexit. But, these guys will stop at nothing. They'll even go down the road of I don't know, say maybe in the middle of the night, dropping off hundreds of thousands of ballots in order to overturn an election result. I mean, they'll stop at nothing. That's what worries me.
Well, indeed. And as I said, I mean, Sunak, I mean, I have to qualify this because, again, I don't know very much about him. But if you look at his background, if you look at his contacts, if you look at who his family is, he does come across very much. He comes across overwhelmingly as, a person of that, a member of that elite who would not be naturally inclined to, press on with Brexit in the way that, say, Johnson and Cummings would. I would add, of course, that Sunak did support Brexit, but then every ambitious Conservative politician a year ago was doing so because they knew that was the overwhelming feeling within the Conservative Party. So in that respect, I mean, I wouldn't place too much confidence in all of that. If it comes down to a contest between Sunak and Gove is clearly the more substantial figure. He's clearly the person who is the more likely to see a kind of Brexit done. But even he, I suspect, would not take the hardline position that the Johnson-Cummings group did. And with Cummings gone, the government now looks very unstable.
That's the key. They're not going to take the hardline position that Boris and Cummings did, and that means it leaves the door wide open for the EU to get what they want.
Yes. I mean, I should say something, by the way, and this is the very last thing I will say. I mean, Cummings himself has many qualities. He's also got many faults. I've never been an unequivocal admirer myself, but that's, putting that aside, leaving now at this time seems to me an extraordinary thing to do. And I also have to say, I mean, I'm critical of the way Cummings himself has handled this. I mean, he too should have stuck in for at least the 2 months that he needed to. I mean, and he should have made that his priority. I mean, I don't understand again what has happened there and why he's allowed himself to be maneuvered out in this way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll say my final things. You can comment, guys. We won't do a close. Just go to the Duran shop, pick up some merchandise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Support this channel, subscribe, help us out. Check if you're still subscribed because YouTube removed yesterday. Actually, they removed about 220 subscribers of ours. Just like bam, just like that.
Good grief.
The UK mug. But that's what worries me, Alexander, about every time you postpone stuff, with these guys, you always leave the door open for them to just come right in and screw it up. It was the same with the US. You postpone going after big tech. You postpone getting rid of a Dr. Fauci or a Christopher Wray or declassifying Russiagate or any of that stuff, and you leave the door open. It's the same thing with the UK. You postpone Brexit, postpone it, and here we are, 2 months before it's all going to wrap up, and bam, the globalists in the EU, they come right after you, and they start working their trickery.
Well, if you remember, that was what Theresa May was doing. She was postponing Brexit all the time, and by the way, seeing the Conservative Party's support collapse. So not perhaps a good idea, but that's what she was doing. So if we're going to be back in that situation, we will see two things happen. One, we will see, as I said, a deal done, which will put Britain in a worse position, in my opinion, than it would have been if it hadn't gone for Brexit at all. That's the first thing. And the second is we will see the Conservative Party's support collapse. And Sunak is not going to be a popular figure in those working class constituencies in the north of England and in the Midlands, which voted Conservative in December 2019. I mean, they won't like him because, well, they will see him as a sort of privileged figure, a member of the elite who they despise. But, they will also feel that he's not getting Brexit done. So There we are.
I think the one wild card is in this, you could say, is Farage. That's the wild card in all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I was puzzled when he came out and said that he was reforming his party on an anti-lockdown issue, because it isn't really his theme, if I can say so. So now it suddenly starts to make more sense, and I'm wondering whether he wasn't being tipped off, that there were things going on within the government that at that time we weren't aware of.
Right. He saw that something was about to derail Brexit, and he said, "You know what? I better get on it." That's the one wild card to the EU, globalist, all the media's plan is that you have a Nigel Farage there.
Exactly.
Would he be willing to take on a guy like Sunak and all these guys?
Oh, absolutely. I think he'd run it. I think he'd love it. Actually, I think what Farage, no question. I mean, absolutely. He took on Cameron. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, the other person that Sunak most resembles, apart from Blair, is Cameron. I mean, Blair was a public school, wealthy background, sort of globalist connected person. Cameron was that, and so was Sunak going to be. And Farage was very effective against Blair, very effective against Cameron. He will be even more effective against Sunak.
All right,
Sunak
incredible stuff.
I mean, the other person he reminds me of, if I can say, I mean, in a kind of way, is Trudeau, Justin Trudeau. I mean,
that's not good.
Exactly, but I mean, you follow him very closely. Again, there's tremendous enthusiasm and almost, adoration that sort of very uncritically surrounds him, and he talks all the talk. He knows how to talk the talk and walk the walk. And of course, when you go behind it, what you will probably find is that there's an empty suit there. That's what I suspect.
Yeah, all these characters, the Obamas, the Trudeaus, all these guys. Yeah, they say all the right things, and then when they get into office, you know exactly what to expect from them.
Exactly.
Boy, really bad news, but let's hope that Boris can hold on for 2 months.
Yes. We'll certainly see where it's going. I mean, as I said, I think he will try to, and I think he's kept his Brexit negotiator, who's a man called Frost, who is, a very strong pro-Brexit figure. But the government as a whole suddenly looks very shaky. Extraordinary to think that just a few months ago, in December of last year, he won an 80-seat majority in a general election. I mean, the extent to which that's all unraveled and the speed at which it's happened is remarkable. And it's also remarkable how many Conservative MPs seem to be ignoring the reasons why they won.
Incredible. All right, we'll end it there. And this is a story that we will be covering a lot, I think.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, Alexander Curse, thank you very much. All right, guys, take care.